poor little girl helps a millionaire fix his Mustang when he sees the ring on her finger. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. By the unforgiving road. Autumn weighed heavily on the quiet flow of traffic in the rural outskirts of Vermont. County Road 16, an official-sounding name for what was really just a two-lane stretch of uneven pavement, blanketed in crisp, fallen leaves, curved under a canopy of fire-red maples. A sleek black Mustang GT, gleaming and out of place in the countryside, sat stalled beneath one of the trees, its hood flung open, engine lifeless. Jack Carter, 37, CEO of Carter and Lanning Real Estate Group, known in city circles as the man who turned concrete into gold, stood at the front of the car, phone pressed to his ear, voice tense and sharp. "I don't care what meeting it is," Jack snapped. "I'm stuck on County Road 16, and this goddamn car won't move. You might find me buried here when the snow hits." He ended the call with a frustrated tap, shoved the phone into his pocket, and stared at the engine as if sheer willpower might coax it back to life. Down the side of the road, Emily Brooks, age 9, was walking home from school. Her backpack sagged at the corners, stuffed with old notebooks and a small tool pouch that belonged to Uncle Matthew, her foster uncle, a kind but struggling mechanic. She whistled softly, feet crunching through the leaves, until she stopped, squinting at the shiny car and its clearly flustered owner. With the instincts of a kid who'd grown up knowing how to survive, Emily noticed it instantly. The engine was overheating. Coolant had begun to drip. She pulled out her small toolkit and approached. "Need help, sir?" she asked, brushing her windswept blonde hair from her face. Jack turned around, momentarily stunned. A child, standing in the woods like some odd apparition, speaking with the composure of a grown-up. "Looks like your coolant's leaking," Emily said matter-of-factly, already examining the engine. "Probably a cracked hose." Jack half laughed, half scoffed. What would a kid like you know about high-end cars? But within minutes, he stood silently watching her small hands work confidently. And sure enough, she found it, a crack in the rubber tubing, right where the coolant was seeping under the chassis. Emily pulled out a strip of heat-resistant tape from her backpack and began to apply it. As she reached across the engine, Jack caught a glint of red on her hand. A ruby ring. His breath caught. That ring, how was that possible? "It belonged to my mom," Emily said quietly, noticing the way he stared. "She said it was a promise from someone who never came back." Jack's chest tightened. That ring, custom-made, with a pattern only he had ever commissioned. The ring he once gave to Lily, a girl from the Sunshine Orphanage, 15 years ago. He sank to the side of the road, eyes locked on Emily. Her eyes, the tilt of her head, the way she bit her lip when she thought. It all came rushing back. He asked softly, carefully, "What's your name?" "Emily Brooks," she said with a smile, her lips chapped from the cold. Jack nodded slowly, and in his mind, questions surged like a tidal wave. Could it be? Could you be her? Could this be the promise I thought time had buried? The car engine roared back to life, thanks to the hands of a dirt-smudged 9-year-old girl. But it wasn't the engine she had fixed. It was his heart. For the first time in years, something deep inside Jack Carter stirred, not from power or money or pride, but from a red ruby on a child's finger, and the echo of a promise he thought he had left behind forever. A sleeping memory can awaken with a single glance. As golden twilight spilled across the winding country road, Jack Carter still hadn't driven away. His black Mustang, temporarily revived by young Emily Brooks, was now purring smoothly. But what haunted him more than the surprise repair was the ruby ring glinting on the girl's hand. Jack hadn't been able to take his eyes off that ring for the entire drive back. He remembered vividly the day he slid an identical one onto the finger of a little orphan girl at the Sunshine Children's Home, a delicate ruby wrapped in golden vines, forming the shape of a rose. That ring had vanished along with the girl after the Sunshine Home was abruptly shut down 15 years ago. Back then, Jack was just a teenage boy, angry, rebellious, desperate to escape the weight of the Reynolds family legacy. But he had made a promise to Lily that he'd come back for her. Now, Jack pulled up in front of the worn-down building where Emily lived with her foster uncle, Matthew. While the girl disappeared inside, Jack remained in his car, gripping a business card tightly, eyes locked in thought. He knew this wasn't just a coincidence. Back at his penthouse in the Reynolds Tower, Jack unlocked his private archive, a room of sealed documents, photos, and files the family had kept under wraps. Anything involving Sunshine had been labeled family confidential. The deeper he dug, the more unsettling it became. The Sunshine home hadn't closed due to budget issues, as the reports claimed. It had been intentionally dismantled under orders from Richard Reynolds, Jack's own father. In a plain envelope with no recipient listed, Jack found an old, faded photograph. A little girl smiling up at the camera, standing beside him in the Sunshine courtyard. Lily. At the top of the picture, a handwritten note. Promised to return, June 28th. That date, the last day Jack had ever seen her. The shame of forgetting someone who had waited twisted painfully in his chest. He pulled out his phone, began searching. Medical records, adoption logs, former staff from Sunshine. A name surfaced repeatedly. Sarah Brooks. Always tied to hush-hush meetings in the months before the home's closure. Sarah Brooks, Emily's adoptive mother. This couldn't be a coincidence. In a dusty folder signed by Richard Reynolds himself, Jack found a chilling line. The integrity of the secondary project relies on erasing all trace of former personnel. In the code-scribbled annotations, a truth began to emerge. His father had deliberately erased Lily's identity. Outside, night settled in. Green neon light shimmered through the window glass. Jack leaned back in his chair, clutching the ring Emily had worn. Inside him, a crack split further through the stone walls of the Reynolds name. This was no longer about a life carved by legacy. It was about a single question. Who will I become, now that the past is stepping into the light? Late that night, Jack composed a discreet email from his private account. Matthew Brooks, I'm the man your niece Emily helped with the Mustang yesterday. We need to talk. About her. And about Sunshine. The story was beginning to unravel. One thread at a time. And at its center, a man unknowingly searching for his daughter. And a little girl carrying a ring to remember a promise the world had forgotten. Those who don't share blood can still be home. The phone call came sharply at 10 p.m., just as Jack Carter stood before his high-rise window, gazing down at the glittering lights of New York. In his hand, still warm from his grip, was a photo of Emily wearing the ruby ring. And in his heart, a question he hadn't yet dared to name. The voice on the other end was that of a woman, low, cautious, and unmistakably guarded. This is Sarah Brooks. Who's asking about Emily? Jack took a breath. My name is Jack Carter. The ring on Emily's hand led me to questions. About a place that vanished 15 years ago, the Sunshine home. Silence. Then a long, tired sigh. I didn't think anyone would ever say that name again, Sarah replied. I was the head nurse there. It was a snowy afternoon 7 years ago when Sarah had broken every professional rule to rescue a child in silence. Lily, the girl with the ruby ring, would become Emily Brooks, her daughter in everything but blood. The next morning, Jack drove straight from Midtown Manhattan to the outer boroughs of Queens. The apartment building was modest, its rusted railing weathered by time, tucked between rows of noisy residential streets. Sarah opened the door, wary at first, but her expression faltered when she saw the ring in Jack's hand. She still kept it, she whispered, voice trembling. I thought she might have forgotten. Jack placed a photo of Emily on the table. You saved her. I owe you everything for that. Sarah began to speak. The Sunshine home had once been a shelter for abandoned children, until Richard Carter, Jack's father, arrived with funding, promises, and a list of twins, children with certain genetic markers, the ones deemed eligible. Sarah discovered a horrifying plan, psychological and biological experiments using the children as test cases, data for future medical and genetic projects. Lily was on that list. They talked about a transfer day, how she'd be removed from the home once she turned 10. Terrified, Sarah faked an illness in the child's record and smuggled her out at night. She created a new identity, a new life. She named her Emily Brooks, and they disappeared into Queens. Jack sat frozen in the small living room, every word striking like a blow. He remembered Lily's tear-streaked face as he left Sunshine for the leadership training Richard had demanded. "Will you come back?" she had asked. He had promised, but he had forgotten. "Until now. I want your help," Jack said quietly. "I want to know everything. I want to be there when Emily finds out." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "She's grown up with love, not with truth. This will hurt. But if you're really coming back, don't leave again." On the drive home, Jack turned onto the empty shoulder of the road, pulling over to face the Queensboro Bridge. The reflection of streetlights scattered across his windshield. He knew the truth now. He knew Lily was Emily, and he understood that in a world obsessed with bloodlines and surnames, some people become family through love, like Sarah had. Now, he would have to learn that for himself before it was too late. He took out his phone and began typing a list. Names of those who had worked alongside Richard. People who might have known what really happened at Sunshine. Carl Mitchell, the Carter family's longtime private attorney. If someone had paved the road to that dark plan, it wasn't just Richard. In the distance, the sky shimmered with city lights. But inside Jack, a different kind of light had begun to rise. The light of responsibility. This time, he would stay. This time, he would walk the road as a father. When family becomes control. The heavy doors of the Carter Holdings private archives slammed shut behind Jack Carter as he stepped out, gripping a folder that made his hands tremble the more he read. The late New York afternoon was turning cold, but it wasn't the wind that tightened his chest. It was the sharp sting of betrayal. By his own father, Richard Carter. Jack hadn't expected much when he reopened Richard's private records. He assumed he'd find old business contracts, maybe a few notes about the Sunshine home. But what he uncovered in the metal cabinet at the back of the vault stopped his breath entirely. Project Gemini, a title on a file. The documents inside were arranged with chilling precision. Lists of twin children, subject codes, assessments of genetic potential and developmental value. Even more disturbing, procedures on how twins were separated, psychologically monitored, and trained based on selective traits. The last name on the list, Lily Grace Carter. Jack's jaw tightened. He already knew Emily was Lily, but now, Grace? He grabbed the full file, stuffed it into his briefcase, and rushed out of the building, the luxury of the Carter name now feeling hollow and heavy. That evening, in the cramped living room of Matthew and Emily's apartment, Jack laid everything out. Under the dim yellow light, Emily sat in silence, clutching her ruby ring as if anchoring herself to reality. Matthew's hands trembled, but his voice remained calm. So Grace could still be alive? Or, Jack answered carefully, it's possible. Or, Richard may have only ever intended for Emily to be part of a long-term plan. Project Gemini had been funded entirely by Richard, Jack explained, and in that plan, people weren't seen as children. They were test subjects. Emily looked up, her eyes shining with tears. "Uncle Jack, if I had a twin sister, why don't I remember her?" Jack gently took her hand. "Because they didn't want you to. Richard, this whole system. They built a fog thick enough to make the whole world forget." The next day, Jack arranged a meeting with Olivia Carter, Emily's biological mother, at St. Andrew's Church. Under the warm flicker of altar candles and wooden arches, Olivia wept at the mention of Grace. "You're saying Grace might still be alive? She may have been taken at birth," Jack said gently, "because Richard believed you should only know about Lily. You might remember through the birth records." Olivia closed her eyes, voice shaking. "He told me Grace died. I was sedated after labor, and when I woke, he said there was only one baby left. He arranged a quiet funeral. I never doubted it. Not until I saw the ruby ring on Emily's hand, and now." Jack placed his hand over hers. "You have the right to know, and Grace deserves to be found." Later that evening, under the light of a rising crescent moon, Jack returned to the apartment. Emily sat curled beside the window, reading quietly. He knelt in front of her. "Emily, do you want to find your sister?" She looked up, hesitant, but then nodded slowly. "I do, but I'm scared." Jack smiled softly. "No matter where she is or what we face, you'll never face it alone again." Emily gave a small nod. Then she reached in her backpack and took out the ruby ring, holding it under the moonlight. If my sister Grace has a ring like mine, do you think I can find her through it? Jack looked at the ring, once a symbol of a broken promise. Now, a clue to a truth buried deep. And in that moment, he knew this story was still only beginning. Choosing to stay when you could leave is the deepest act of love. It was a phone call made during a routine gas stop that changed Jack Carter's life. Just as he stepped away from the pump, a name flashed across the screen. Victoria Hale. For a second, his thumb hovered over the decline button. His carefully chosen fiancée, the woman who had always played the perfect part at charity galas and contract signings. But how much did Victoria know? Had she learned that Jack had been tracing Emily, the child Richard Carter had kept hidden? He answered. Her voice came through calm, too calm. I think you should meet me. Privately. They met at a quiet cafe, tucked away in Midtown Manhattan. Victoria sat across from him, immaculate as ever. Perfectly polished nails, tailored coat. But behind her cold eyes was something unmistakably raw. Pain. You're not going to ask why I called? She teased dryly. I figured it's either blackmail or tabloid bait, Jack replied flat. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. That's probably the smartest thing Richard ever trained me to expect. Jack stiffened. He told you to follow me and report back. I've been doing it for years. Since I was 10. The words hit Jack like a punch to the chest. Victoria looked down at her hands for a moment, then slowly slid a photo across the table. It showed two identical girls, no older than 7, both wearing ruby rings. Jack shot up from his chair. That's me and Lily, she said, voice suddenly thick. The girl you met, Emily. The one who fixed your Mustang. She swallowed hard. My real name is Grace. Within a single week, everything began to unravel. Jack contacted Matthew Brooks, Emily's foster uncle and the only father she'd ever known. The man was hesitant, even suspicious, but in the end, he agreed to face the truth. They met in a small wooden house on the edge of rural New Jersey. 3 people sat at a kitchen table that suddenly carried the weight of years. Does Emily know? Matthew asked. Definitely not, Jack replied quietly. There's something about the way she sees the world that makes it hard to speak the truth. He paused. The way she looked at the engine and said, the coolant's leaking. It was like a second language to her. Across from them, Grace, once Victoria, sat silently, twisting the ruby ring on her finger. Then, almost like a whispered prayer, she said, I don't want to be part of Richard's game anymore. Let me help. Help my sister. Jack didn't respond right away. The question echoed in his chest. Could he trust someone who had shadowed him for half his life? But Emily was part of Grace's blood, and in her eyes, Jack saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. A plea for redemption, and a flicker of trust. He nodded slowly. Starting today, we're family, Grace. Some legacies aren't measured in wealth, but in loyalty. Safety Deposit Box 218 at First National Bank sat behind a soundproof chamber near the vault, its walls lined in copper-toned steel and lit by flickering fluorescent light. Emily clutched Jack's hand tightly as they stepped inside, the old key, still dusty from time, pressed in her palm by Sarah Brooks. The bank manager eyed them warily, but the documentation was solid. Official ownership transfer, signed by Sarah. She had no choice but to escort them to the vault. I'll give you some privacy, the woman said curtly before closing the heavy steel door behind them. In the breathless quiet that followed, Emily slid the key into the slot. With a soft click, the box opened. Inside were 3 items: an envelope, a wooden box, and an age journal, its cover brittle with time. Emily lifted the journal first and opened it to the first page. The paper had yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but the words were etched with conviction. June 25th. Today I overheard Richard speaking with the orphanage director. They're initiating Project Gemini, separating twin children, tracking their psychology, turning them into assets for the program. Lily and Grace have been selected. I can't leave Lily behind. Jack's breath caught in his throat. All the truths he'd suspected were suddenly undeniable. The ruby ring had started the unraveling, But this journal confirmed everything. Richard Carter, a titan of business, was also the architect of something far darker. A man who manipulated fate itself. Jack reached for the wooden box next. Inside were a microfilm reel, a small handheld reader, and a note in familiar handwriting. Project Gemini, confidential. Emily looked up wide-eyed. What's Project Gemini, Jack? Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, though his pulse pounded. It's something no child should ever be part of. It's a program that tried to turn you and your sister into tools for someone else's gain. He turned to Matthew, who had stood quietly in the corner, eyes heavy with realization. I need to see what's on that microfilm tonight. That evening, they found a still-operating archival center in the city. They slid the microfilm into the machine, and on the grainy screen appeared contracts, transactions, a ledger of children split apart, each with an ID number and a label beside it. High potential, replacement candidate, non-compliant. Two names froze, Jack in place. Lily Carter, Grace Carter, both listed under twin ID G107. Lily, transferred under supervision of SB. Grace, transferred to Family H. Family H, Matthew whispered. Huntington, Victoria Hale. Jack exhaled slowly. It was worse than he'd imagined. Richard had raised one daughter, Grace, to be his chosen successor, and he had watched over Lily from a distance. As a backup, Jack turned toward Emily, who sat curled in a corner of the room, eyes red, still clutching the ruby ring. He knelt in front of her, voice soft. You are not an experiment, Emily. You are proof that we get to choose who we become. She looked into his eyes, and in that fragile moment asked, Are you going to stay? Her gaze held a quiet, glowing strength that broke something in Jack's chest. I'm not going anywhere, he whispered. We'll put back together every broken piece of the family they tried to tear apart. And so, in a quiet copy room nestled in a weary city, a family began to reclaim itself. Through the ink of an old journal, through a ruby ring that had endured, and through the loyalty of a mother who never stopped protecting her daughters, even from the grave. 1 second of courage can bring down an empire built on fear. A heavy gray sky hung over the Sunshine Plaza inauguration, as if signaling what was to come. Under the golden guidelights, Manhattan's elite stepped onto the glittering stage, surrounded by crystal and floral displays. On stage, the Reynolds Development logo shone like a monument to success. But behind the scenes, Jack Carter was preparing for the confrontation of a lifetime. Dressed in a simple suit, his face was tense but resolute. In his hand, a USB drive containing everything. The full truth behind Project Gemini, the manipulation of children, and the secret identities of Emily and Grace. Victoria Hale approached, elegantly dressed, carefully made up, but her eyes cold with focus. Everything's ready, she said. Security's been bypassed. Matthew's in the tech booth. DR. Winters is seated, row D, seat 9. Jack nodded, drawing a long, steady breath. He looked up once more at the glowing Reynolds logo. This empire ends tonight. Inside the auditorium, Richard Carter stood proudly on stage, opening the ceremony with his usual pomp. Sunshine Plaza is not just a structure, it's a legacy. From a side aisle, Jack stepped forward. Security hesitated, but recognized his clearance. He walked directly on stage, gripped the mic, and looked out over the crowd of hundreds. I'd like to share a truth Reynolds Development has hidden for over 15 years. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Before this plaza, there was another Sunshine. Sunshine Children's Home. It was shut down abruptly. Many children vanished. Most people didn't even know until it was too late. Behind him, Matthew activated the screen, broadcasting the files from the USB. Photos, records, video clips of the children, documented and archived. Emily Brooks, the girl who helped me by the roadside. Her real name is Lily Carter. She's the biological daughter of Richard Carter and Olivia Carter. Gasps filled the room. At that moment, the main doors opened. Emily walked in, wearing a simple white dress, a ruby ring glowing on her hand. Beside her, Olivia, radiant with tears. Jack turned to his father. Richard, you had Lily. You tore her from her mother, deceived Olivia for 15 years. You built Project Gemini to experiment on children's minds. Richard stepped forward, grabbing his second mic. Everything I did was for the future. I built this empire for our family, for the company. Family. A voice rang out from the crowd. Victoria stepped forward, pulling back her hood. Her pawns. My name is Grace Carter, Emily's twin sister. You stole me at birth and gave me a new name. The room exploded into chaos. Olivia collapsed. Emily stood frozen, speechless. Then Dr. Winters rose from her seat. I was the director at Sunshine. Richard used his power to force us to select children, falsify reports, and orchestrate disappearances. She raised a recording device. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes burst like lightning. The auditorium doors flew open again. FBI agents entered. Richard Carter, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, data manipulation, and the exploitation of minors. Richard paled as they cuffed him. As he was led away, he turned to Jack one last time. I made you. You're nothing but a copy, my failed contingency. Jack didn't respond. He looked instead at Emily, his sister, at Grace, who had chosen her truth over comfort. The crowd rose to its feet. Applause thundered. Sometimes, truth doesn't need shared blood. It just needs 1 second of courage to be heard. And tonight, that second had finally come. A life once buried can become the key to justice. Golden autumn light bathed the rooftop of Reynolds Plaza as luxury vehicles rolled to a stop one by one at the grand entrance. The unveiling of Sunshine Plaza, spearheaded by Richard Carter, chairman of Carter Development, had drawn hundreds of guests, executives, reporters, and public figures alike. While a symphony orchestra played an elegant overture, Jack Carter stood backstage, heart locked in a steel cage of resolve. There was no going back now. Emily Brooks, real name Lily Carter, stood in the side room, fingering her ruby ring, the last remaining evidence of a stolen past. On stage, Richard began his speech with practiced calm. His silver hair swept back and eyes dulled from years of power. Sunshine Plaza will be a beacon for New York's future, he declared. But before he could finish, Jack stepped onto the stage. If I may, he said into the mic. The audience murmured, confused. Richard turned to face his son, suspicion creeping into his eyes. Jack looked out over the crowd and began the words he'd rehearsed for weeks. 15 years ago, on the very ground we're standing, there was an orphanage called Sunshine Home. It was shut down overnight. All records erased. Today, I'm here to tell you why. Behind him, the LED screen came alive. Documents, names, medical notes, evidence from Project Gemini filled the screen. Children cataloged, experimented on, labeled with potential. Richard stepped forward in panic, reaching for the mic. Lies. My son is clearly unstable, manipulated. At that moment, the auditorium doors opened. Heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. Every head turned. Sarah Brooks stepped into the room. She wore a soft hat. Her frame was thin, but her eyes burned bright. The hall fell, deathly silent. Richard froze. Sarah, he whispered as if seeing a ghost. I'm alive, she said, and I'm here to speak for the children you treated like assets. Gasps echoed around the room. Sarah told everything. How Richard had separated Lily and Grace at birth. How he shut down Sunshine Home to cover up experimentation. How she had faked her death and fled with Lily, sacrificing everything to protect her. Jack scanned the room. Olivia's tears streamed silently. Emily, sitting in the audience, trembled as truth came crashing down. When Sarah finished, the doors opened once more. FBI agents entered. Richard Carter, an agent, announced, flashing his badge. You're under arrest for fraud, child endangerment, data manipulation, and obstruction of justice. The crowd of reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Richard was handcuffed and escorted from the stage, his empire of pain collapsing beneath him. At the front of the room stood Sarah, Emily, Grace, Jack, and Olivia, a family once shattered by ambition, betrayal, and silence. Now, standing together, The cameras captured the image of family that had been broken, lied to, and torn apart, but who chose to stand side by side to witness the downfall of the empire that tried to erase them. Broken pieces rebuilt by courage. The sky over Manhattan burned with color, yet Jack's feet felt cold as he stepped out of the courthouse. Photographers swiveled their lenses toward him, especially when they saw Emily clutching his hand tightly. He wore a light gray suit. He was no longer the heir of the Carter Empire, just a father trying to make things right. "I want to change my name to Emily Brooks," the 9-year-old girl said clearly to the judge. "I want to carry the name of my mom, Sarah, the one who took me when no one else dared." The courtroom fell silent. Olivia wept openly. Matthew's jaw tightened. The only one surprised was Jack. "You want to be a Brooks?" he asked softly. Emily nodded. "You let go of the Carter name. I think I should too." 3 weeks later, at Sarah's home in Beacon, New York, a new family had quietly begun to form. Olivia moved in to be close to her daughter and 2 granddaughters. Matthew left his night shifts to build a small carpentry workshop out back. Jack, now legally Jack Brooks, let go of everything tied to the Carter name. He committed his remaining wealth to launch the Sunshine Hope Foundation, with plans to rebuild the old Sunshine Home as a center for abandoned, orphaned, and exploited children. In the warm kitchen, Emily cut cardboard with a small craft knife. Olivia cleaned dishes. Grace, once Victoria, warmed milk for a neighbor's toddler. Sometimes Sarah just stood and watched, silent and still, overcome by the sight. She often thought to herself, "I spent years running. Who would have thought I'd finally feel peace? In the same house I once put my faith in." That evening, Jack gathered everyone for a meeting. On the table, architectural plans for the new Sunshine Hope Center. Counseling rooms, vocational. Classrooms, a library, and shared living spaces. "I want Emily to be listed as co-founder," Jack said. "No one understands what it means to be forgotten better than her." Emily blushed but nodded. "I want the playroom to have a Lego table, books, and a tool bench, so every kid has something to call home." Grace wiped her eyes. She, once meant to be Jack's bride by family arrangement, now only wanted to be Emily's big sister, and a mentor to kids who had once been like her. That weekend, they visited the cemetery. They placed new grave markers for Sarah and Olivia, symbolic reminders of lives once erased, now restored. Standing before them, Jack rested a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Family," he said, "is who we choose to love." Emily replied, "The one who saved me was part of the past. If ashes can rise into green trees again, then maybe we're worth that too." Jack looked around at Olivia, Sarah, Matthew, Grace, and Emily. His family. For the first time, not tied by marriage, contract, or blood. This family was chosen, not born. When scars are seen, they can become symbols of hope. On a crisp autumn morning, as sunlight filtered through red and amber leaves, Jack Brooks sat quietly on the wooden steps in front of the newly completed Sunshine Memorial Center. Wearing an old wool coat and holding a cup of hot coffee, he watched children playing with toys on the fresh green lawn. Where the steel and concrete foundations of the former Sunshine Plaza once stood, cold, rigid, and soulless, there was now laughter, music, and the promise of something better. Jack was not a man who cried easily. But today, watching Emily, the same little girl who once fixed his broken Mustang, stand poised, strong, and filled with purpose as she prepared to host the opening ceremony, he knew every scar from the past had been turned into light. The Sunshine Memorial Center had been built on the very site where darkness once thrived, the old Sunshine Children's Home. While some had pushed to erase every trace of its existence, Jack had chosen to face it and rebuild it. With the help of Victoria, Olivia, Matthew, Sarah, and Emily, they had vowed to transform a place once defined by pain into one of healing and hope. As the ceremony began, Emily stepped onto the stage. Wearing a soft blue dress and sneakers, she faced a crowd of hundreds and delivered the opening speech. Her voice was clear and steady, gentle but powerful. "I'm proud to be a part of the Sunshine Center. This isn't just a place for orphans. It's a place that accepts scars, and turns them into stories worth standing on. No one in the audience expected such words from a 10-year-old girl. But Jack knew better. What Emily had endured was more than a lifetime's worth of lessons. The center now featured classrooms for vocational training, counseling rooms, a community kitchen, and a memorial garden. In that garden, Jack placed Emily's ruby ring, a symbol of destiny, survival, and the power of a single right choice. Sarah, Olivia, and Victoria all held roles on the center's founding board. Victoria oversaw fundraising and administration. Sarah coordinated health services. Olivia managed outreach to charity networks and grant providers. That afternoon, Jack found Emily sitting alone in the garden. She was staring at the new silver ring on her hand, a symbol of her chosen family. "Uncle Jack," she asked quietly, "are we really a family?" Jack gently placed his hand on her shoulder, nodding. "Family isn't about blood," he said. "It's about the people who choose to love you, no matter who you are or what you've been through." "And yes, Emily, we are a family." The words made Emily smile softly. She leaned against Jack's shoulder, her eyes lifting toward the sky, now painted in the deep red of sunset. A long road had been walked, but a new one, brighter, stronger, was just beginning. Autumn arrived faster than expected. On a quiet Saturday morning, with mist still wrapping around the small wooden house tucked in the Catskills Valley, Emily quietly walked the porch, holding her vintage Polaroid camera. "Jack!" Her voice rang out, full of excitement and urgency. From the kitchen, Jack Brooks peeked out. He was heating water for his morning coffee, a ritual he'd kept ever since moving to the countryside. "Come out here. Everyone, stand close together." Outside on the porch, Sarah, Olivia, Matthew, and Victoria sat bundled up in layers, their hands bearing silver rings, each one carrying the marks of time, fate, and silent scars. But here, in this moment, they were laughing. Emily raised her camera and adjusted the frame. "We need our first real family photo," she said. "Not because any of us are perfect, but because we chose each other." Jack stood in the middle, arms around Olivia and Victoria. Emily stood in front, nestled between Sarah's arms. Matthew placed a hand gently on Olivia's shoulder. As Emily pressed the shutter, morning sunlight poured through the porch windows. The photo printed, slowly from the old camera, warming up as the image took shape. Emily flipped it over, gazing at the familiar faces captured side by side. She whispered, "This is the photo I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." Later that afternoon, inside the Sunshine Memorial Center, Emily placed the photo into a handcrafted wooden frame and gently set it at the entrance to the remembrance room. She wrote one simple line beneath it: "Family is who stays with you when the world turns away." That evening, they all sat around the fire pit, sharing stories of the past, trading hopes for the future. The family photo wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was chosen. It was earned. It stood for a new kind of legacy, one not defined by blood, but by presence, acceptance, and love. And in the flicker of firelight, the image of their chosen family glowed across Emily's face, closing one chapter and quietly opening another. Because now, more than ever, family was not something inherited. It was something made with intention and heart. Legacy isn't in what we own, it's in how we choose to live. Spring sunlight broke through New York's skyline just after the first early rain. The soft beams filtered through budding leaves, marking a new position on the city's calendar. Inside a modest community center in the Bronx, Jack Brooks stood in the middle of a vocational training class for local youth. He wasn't wearing a suit. His rolled-up sleeves were smudged with grease and iron dust, and in his hand was a piece of car engine. The dozen teens watching him did so with quiet respect, like he was the one person who might show them the way out of their fractured neighborhoods. "A real business plan doesn't just ask how to make money," Jack told them softly. "It asks, who will come with me?" It was something Sarah once said to him, back when they talked about reclaiming the abandoned buildings left behind by his father's failed projects. He was no longer Jack Carter, the cold heir of Richard Carter. He was Jack Brooks now, a man who chose family over legacy, truth over power. News of the growing Sunshine Community Network spread fast across business circles. The media couldn't understand why a man who once sat atop billion-dollar real estate deals would walk away to open places like drop-in centers for abuse survivors, safe spaces for at-risk youth, and vocational training hub for those needing a fresh start. Some said he was seeking redemption. Others claimed he was simply searching for peace. Jack didn't care. What he didn't know was this. Every young person who stepped into a Sunshine Center was someone unlocking their future. At a city council meeting in Detroit, Jack introduced Sunshine as a social project that didn't measure profit in dollars, but in dignity, hope, and second chances. "I don't want to build soulless towers anymore," he said. "I want to build places where children's eyes can shine with hope again." And they believed him. At the Sunshine Brooklyn branch, 12-year-old Emily Brooks, grown, confident, and luminous, stood in front of her creative writing class and read a poem of her own. "Return to the one who apologizes without being asked, the one who stays when others leave, the one who thanks life even after it broke them. They're the ones who build legacies." Jack sat in the back row, light filtering across his face, and his heart full. He knew then that the legacy he was building didn't live in leather-bound portfolios or polished boardrooms. It lived here, in the hesitant handwriting of a child who had lost her mother, her name, but never her hope. A true legacy, to him, began with listening, with trusting, with loving freely. And when Emily tugged on his sleeve after class and whispered, "I think the new center should have a poetry room," Jack smiled and nodded, because that's how a legacy ends and how it begins. The afternoon at the Sunshine Center felt different. The summer heat had softened, but something electric hung in the air, a hum of anticipation. It was Emily's first live national television interview. The 10-year-old had agreed after much hesitation. Reporters were asking for an insider's perspective on the Carter Empire's downfall. Jack, Olivia, and Sarah had held several long discussions before giving their blessing. But in the end, Emily made the decision herself. "I want to speak in my own way," she had said. The cameras rolled. The lights blazed. The audience waited. The well-known CBS anchor leaned forward. "Why did you choose to speak out?" Emily wore a simple white shirt. Her hair was tied back neatly. Her face was clear, calm, more composed than anyone had expected. She sat up straight, like someone who had already faced questions far bigger than her years. "Because there are kids like me, living inside stories no one believes," she said. "I used to think I was no one. Just Emily. But now I know. I'm Lily Carter." A hush fell over the studio. But Emily didn't stop. She looked directly at the anchor. "But I will still be Emily Brooks. I got to choose a life where I'm respected. Not to erase who I was, but to become who I want to be." In the audience, Jack swallowed hard. Olivia gripped Sarah's hand. Matthew let out a quiet exhale. In that moment, titles and bloodlines shrank to nothing. Emily's choice, her voice, became her legacy. After the broadcast, Emily walked backstage where Olivia waited, arms open. She pulled her into a hug, soft and certain. Not because of DNA, but because this was her daughter. Emily glanced one last time at the ruby ring on her finger. She stepped into the center's remembrance room, placed the ring inside a glass box, and slid a small handwritten note beneath it. A legacy of the past, but a beginning for choices to come. On her hand now shone a simple silver ring, catching the light of the setting sun. No status, no bloodline, no title, only love and choice. And that was how a real family was rebuilt, not by inheritance, but by the silver ring on the hand of a 10-year-old girl, standing proudly before the nation's cameras. The rustling leaves on the schoolyard swayed together, following the subtle tilt of autumn. New York glowed with a soft orange light, and the warm scent of baked apple pie drifted from the center's kitchen. Today wasn't a board meeting, not a press conference, not a revelation of truth. Today was the first day of school at the Sunshine Memorial Center. But the most unexpected moment came when Emily Brooks, now 11, walked up to the stage with a trembling stack of paper in her hands. "I'd like to read a poem, one I wrote myself." Her voice wasn't shaky like the air in the auditorium. It was clear. Before her sat hundreds, children at the center, survivors of the old system, volunteers, and those seeking a new beginning. Emily began softly. There are families built from pain, but stronger for the choice to stay. Not blood, not name, not money made, but love we give and choose each day. A deep silence blanketed the room. Then, a thunder of applause. Not just for the poem, but for the courage of a girl who had once been a victim, now standing as a symbol of renewal. In the front row, Jack Brooks gripped Sarah's hand, his eyes never leaving Emily. "This is something I thought I'd never deserve," he whispered. "But maybe the most important thing is just having the courage to begin again." After the ceremony, as people mingled by the cookie table and sipped hot cocoa, Emily quietly slipped away to the memorial room. Inside the glass case were the artifacts of the past: a sliver of wood from the original Sunshine home gate, a copy of Sarah's letter, and, centered between them, the ruby ring. Once, it had symbolized power, promises, and stolen time. Now, beside it, resting on white velvet, sat a simple silver ring, elegant, modest, and quietly proud. Emily had chosen to wear it a week ago, not to prove lineage, but to honor love freely given. Jack approached, resting a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Maybe we're born in the dark, Emily, but you're showing others the way with your own light." She nodded. "I just want the other kids to know they can become anyone, even if it starts with pain." That night at dinner, Olivia raised her glass of grape juice. Jazz played softly in the background. Victoria had returned from Detroit, where she'd opened a new Sunshine Center. Matthew told a story about a new boy who'd joined after his mother passed away. Emily leaned against Sarah. "I think we should name a part of the garden," she said. Sarah smiled. "Which part?" "Where Grace and I read. I want to plant a tree there. I want to bury the hard things. Let them grow roots instead." From the porch, Jack watched as Emily ran outside with a sapling in her arms. Hospitals, hearings, interviews. She wasn't just surviving. She was honoring life. Sarah joined Jack. "Back then, when I vanished out of fear, I never believed redemption was possible," Jack murmured. Sarah placed her hand gently on his. "You lost your way, but you came back and kept walking. That's redemption. No speech is needed." He nodded slowly. "I think our story has finally reached its end." She smiled. "Or maybe it's just the beginning." The next morning, beneath the young sapling, Emily stood with her silver ring, one hand pressed against the stone marker. For those who chose to stay, even when it hurt. For those who chose to love, even when they didn't have to. The ruby ring remained in the memorial room, a relic of history. But what had truly begun was blooming in the quietest corners. Families aren't always born together. They're the ones who choose each other, hold on through the dark, and walk forward together. In today's world, where people are often swept up in the pursuit of success, status, and relationships defined by blood or title, the story of Emily Brooks and Jack Carter reminds us of the true meaning of family. Not something we are born into, but a bond we choose with our hearts. Emily, a girl once hidden away to serve cold calculations, taught a wealthy but emotionally hollow man life's most important lesson. Love cannot be forced. It can only be given freely, with trust and choice. In life, many of us carry invisible ruby rings, old wounds, buried memories, or truths long concealed. But just as Emily did, we have the power to choose, to carry the past as a burden, or to lay it down and move forward with a silver ring, a symbol of hope, of rebirth in a family that may not be perfect, but is real. Jack gave up the Carter name to become a Brooks, not to erase his past, but to stand on the side of love. He didn't use his wealth to restore a reputation. He used it to build the Sunshine Memorial Center, a place where children once forgotten are now offered a future. In real life, this reminds us that no matter how broken or defeated we may feel, we can always begin again, not by rebuilding what we lost, but by sowing something good for someone else. This story inspires anyone standing at a crossroads between chasing what is considered success and seeking what truly gives life meaning: human connection. In a time when relationships are fragile, when trust feels rare and commitment is elusive, choosing to love, despite fear, despite pain, is perhaps the most courageous and healing act we can make. We may not get to choose where we come from, but we always get to choose where we belong. And like Emily, we can each say, I'm not defined by where I came from, but by where I choose to stay, and by the people I choose to love. That is the beginning of every true family. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.